I'm James Hughes, bioethicist and resident technoprogressive.
And I'm Eisikovits, philosopher and resident Luddite.
And you're listening to Prosthetic Gods, an optimist and a grump on tech, a podcast where we explore the social, ethical, and political impacts of emerging technologies.
Dr. Hughes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, brother.
How are you?
I am, life keeps throwing curveballs, but I'm catching and pitching. So.
Yeah, life keeps throwing curveballs. You make lemonade of them. We mix our metaphors within 30 seconds. All right, we are having a bit of a meta conversation today about technoprogressivism, and we thought this would be interesting because Dr. Hughes is one of the most noted progressives. So we'll talk about what technoprogressivism is, why it's completely wrong, and call it a day. But before that, we should remind our listeners that we now have an email, prostheticgods@gmail.com, in which we will be very pleased to read all of your praise.
Yes, and we publish our podcast through Podbean. So if you do Podbean Prosthetic Gods, or if you just do Prosthetic Gods, you should be able to find us pretty quick. And we also put things up on our Substack, the IET Substack. So you can find us in a variety of ways.
Excellent. So how should we start? Do you want to kind of define what technoprogressivism is?
Yes. Let me start there. In the first place, I have to confess that my approach to technoprogressivism, my approach to kind of ideology in general, is shaped by having grown up in the anti-Stalinist left, the New York Jewish left, and where the parsing of small ideological differences is seen as extremely important work. Mm-hmm. and I've always identified with the small sects of intellectuals who go on to have tremendous influence, like the Fabians in England or the Shachtmanites here in the United States, who influenced both neoconservatism and democratic socialism. So for me, the history of this, and the history of this term, I should say, is back in the 90s when I got involved in transhumanism and started to meet transhumanists, realized immediately that most of the people I was talking to were right-wing anarcho-capitalists of one sort or another. Met the Europeans. The Europeans were far more open-minded, started to find the people who I agreed with, basically social democrat, left-leaning transhumanists out there. We tried to pull everything together when I was running the World Transhumanist Association in the 2000s. I wrote Citizen Cyborg, in 2004, which is an argument for a social democratic, or what I called in that book, a democratic transhumanism. The term democratic transhumanism never really took off, but as the left and the right within the World Transhumanist Association began to fall apart, Peter Thiel, in retrospect, Peter Thiel's influence was being felt, and he and his minions eventually took over that group. And we decamped into the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, which I now run, and Bostrom and I and the left wing of that organization at the time. And we started to use, pretty quickly after that, we started to use the term technoprogressivism instead of democratic transhumanism. And one of the purposes for that is that transhumanism is very specifically about human enhancement. And I think that the philosophical issues around the debates about technology and politics are far broader than human enhancement. And if you want to say something about, for instance, geoengineering, it's not appropriate to try to bring transhumanism into it. But there are very similar philosophical issues. And I would say that the relationship to the philosophy is that, and as I worked my way backwards from the ideas that I was attracted to now, it's like in the 90s, my question was, where did all the enthusiasm about technology on the left go? Why are leftists so freaking Luddite when, Lenin said that socialism plus electrification equals communism, or, Marxist Promethean visions of technological futures and so forth? Working my way backwards, I discovered people like Condorcet, the French revolutionary and mathematician, whose thesis on the future of all human progress, which he wrote right before he was assassinated by the Jacobins, said that reason, that the French Revolution represented reason's liberation of humanity and that it would liberate humanity not only from slavery and patriarchy and monarchy, but also from toil and from death. And so the beginnings of the bio-ameliorist vision that we'd be able to overcome illness and death. And so for me, the technoprogressivism as a kind of nexus or an ideological tendency, and that's why I say it's, I'm parsing it like a Trotskyist would. It's there's about 1,000 people in the world, maybe, or 2,000 who would use the term technoprogressive to describe themselves. And I hope it grows. But, so far I'm just trying to figure out what we can do with this small niche of people. But I think that we stand in a tradition, a 200-year tradition of Enlightenment thought that tries to connect faith and reason, science, and the idea of progress, of technological progress, with democracy, self-determination, individual liberty, and those kinds of ideas. Now, you see different admixtures of this throughout time, like Marxist-Leninism definitely had the myth of, had the vision of progress, technological progress, and that it would be liberatory, but it dropped a lot of the individual liberty stuff along the way. Right. And neoliberalism had its own version of technology liberating us, and maybe the contemporary techno-utopians had their own vision of people liberating us, but dropped the egalitarian parts of it along the way. So technoprogressivism for me is best represented by a kind of social democratic vision that is high tech and that is trying to look forward to what technology how we can be liberated by technology in the future, and the complementary aspects of political liberation with technological liberation.
Yeah, it's essentially this long tradition that, as you say correctly, you and your colleagues seem to be heir to, of achieving progressive goals by technological means, namely that believing that technology is one of the most, probably the most promising means to achieve progressive goals. And in that sense, you're right, it continues a Enlightenment story. So you have the sort of before the Enlightenment, even you have the famous Descartes pronouncement in the Discourse on Method that science and eventually technology will make us sort of the masters and possessors of nature. But he specifically goes into curing diseases and overcoming death, and then fast forwarding into even more recent Enlightenment than Condorcet, you have John Stuart Mill in Utilitarianism, who says that anyone worth listening to at all understands that all our diseases and the fact that our objects of affection die and are due either to bad science or bad policy. So rationalized policy aided by technology can solve most of our problems. And then we talked about this before, you still see sort of echoes of this even in something like Dario Amodei, the chief of Anthropic, who probably is the closest to techno-progressivism from the Silicon Valley big players, even though he's probably not himself. He writes this essay called Machines of Loving Grace, which essentially lays out this Condorcet-like vision of how technology can solve all of these problems. So...
But I would make the distinction that I think there's an implicit social theory in technoprogressive, the people who use the idea of technoprogressivism, that is not that technology will make us more equal. It's that technology opens the parameters of human possibility, and that's good in and itself. That it's good for human beings and humanity as a whole to have more freedom, but that those parameters could go in good and bad directions. And we got together in Paris in 2014 when a lot of futurists and transhumanists were beginning to realize that Peter Thiel and their ilk were dragging the futurist and transhumanist message in a reactionary and now we see fascist direction. And we tried to put a flag in the ground and say that, we wanted to go in the other direction. And we did this techno-progressive declaration, and this is the first paragraph of it. The world is unacceptably unequal and dangerous. Emerging technologies could make things dramatically better or worse. unfortunately, too few people yet understand the dimensions of the threats and rewards that humanity faces. It's time for techno-progressives to step up to our political engagement and attempt to influence the course of events. So by saying that, we're trying to say, look, we're not techno-utopians. We're not saying that AI or the internet or genetic engineering or anything is going to make everything better. That's techno-utopianism, unwarranted faith in progress. We're not Luddites. And we're not traditional leftists either, because traditional leftists generally are hostile to technology, associating technology with the bad things that they want to stop. We're saying society's going to change, the parameters are going to open, and we have to figure out how to make us go in the right direction.
Yeah, that techno-progressive declaration that says that technology can make things either a lot better or a lot worse, it does seem to rest on this kind of view of technology as a instrument of human agency that's independent of it, right? It does seem to kind of reflect the idea that technology is a tool and merely a tool subject to good progressive social policy. Are you okay with that?
No, and because I think actually what it rests on is the socio-technical systems view, or that's from science and technology studies, but basically the idea that the ontological distinction between humanity and our technology is unwarranted.
Okay.
We are our technology. We are one with our technology.
We're technological beings, as it were.
We're technological beings. We have been since the invention of fire, literacy, and so on.
Okay.
So the evolving thing that is humanity, which involves also our technologies, that thing is changing all the time. And we know it's changing in certain directions, and certain technologies are going to open it up in new ways.
Okay, so I'm relieved that you don't have that naive view of technology, of being subject to agency. But so when you say that we're technological beings, so one way to interpret that, because I'm thinking about this point that you're making both now and in the declaration that you referenced of how technology keeps opening up horizons and possibilities. What do you think about this kind of Heideggerian point that the technology that you have keeps changing your possibilities, or the way that you see the world? The person who enters the forest with an axe no longer sort of sees the majesty of the forest, but sees a bunch of resources that they can sort of subject to their will by the axe. The person who, climbs Mount Cadillac with a phone sees something different from the person who climbs Mount Cadillac without the phone. So it's not just opening vistas, it's shaping
I think
what you
our
can
ancestors spent several 100,000 years chipping stone adzes. And they spent a hell of a lot more time on their stone adzes than we spent on our technologies. Mm-hmm. So I presume they saw the forest as through the lens of their stone adze, their little axe.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I mean, I remember one of the first jobs I had was weed whacker, and I would spend 8 hours a day weed whacking at a corporate property. And I would dream weed whacking. Yes, work tends to do that to your vision. That's one of the reasons why we don't like work, because we want people to be able to fill their brains with whatever they want. But so you're saying that part of your critique is every new technology we invent changes the way we see the world, and you don't like that.
No, I guess this was more of a descriptive. I'm still trying to get clear on the parameters of your view. This was more of a descriptive point. Changes the way we see our world. My critique would not be that. I mean, that I would take to be a fact, and we seem to agree on that fact, namely that a knife is not just a tool through which the agent can decide to either stab someone or spread butter. A knife also changes the way the agent actually sees the world. No, my critique really is so far so good, but that potentially some technologies are so inherently problematic that they might overwhelm the kind of possibilities that we see, and that there can be a category of inherently or more inherently problematic technologies than others, that there's qualitative differences between technologies. And I'm not seeing that there's room for that distinction in your worldview.
No, I think there is, because we are explicitly saying that there's more and less liberatory ways to implement technologies. I think that the important point about the social theory is that, Winner's point that politics is inscribed in technology is correct. Every technology shows the marks of the power relations that it developed within. But that doesn't determine the nature of the future, right? So if you say every new technological development is going to further the oppression of the poor and the weak, then how did we ever have the growth of democracy and freedom? So what happens is that they do inscribe their power on it, they do inscribe their views on it, and then human beings use it in liberatory ways and try to find out what the limits of liberation are within each new social mode of production. So when applying to your more, I don't know, what's your phenomenological concerns? I think you can walk around with virtual reality glasses on, given our current technological constraints, or you can keep your phone in your pocket. Both of those are open as options for human beings today. We're not determined by the fact that there is virtual reality to walk around in virtual reality.
So, I guess what I was referencing more are, and with very big differences between them, both nuclear weapons and smartphones seem to be qualitatively problematic technologies. One, because it's potentially world-ending and it depends too much on the competence and rationality of people to use it for generating energy rather than blowing up the world. And the other one because it has been shown to destroy our capacity to pay attention. Those are very different for me than, both cars and self-driving cars, both of which probably have a net positive cost-benefit calculation, etc. So I guess the question is, on this techno-progressive view, do you have to be sort of democratic about your approach to all technologies, or are you allowed to sort of rule some of them out as opposed to others?
No, absolutely. At least I have always emphasized that there has to be some technologies the techno-progressives would be willing to ban. And we have to figure out what kinds of technologies those are. Weapons of mass destruction are obviously at the top of the list. And I think that it was the consideration of weapons of mass destruction and the existential risks that emerging technologies pose that gave considerable weight to the techno-progressive critique in the 2000s, really. When people like Bostrom started to hold conferences on global catastrophic risks, and we started to think about, his dangerous world hypothesis is that we're basically pulling random technologies out of a bucket, and we know that there's some in there that are going to kill us all, and we're just pulling them out at random and not thinking about what we're doing. And he's right. That's an extremely dangerous thing to do, and we have to figure out how to have the institutions that would protect us against those risks, that would mitigate those risks. For me, that leads immediately to the question of governance, and hopefully transnational governance. But as soon as you say governance, and especially transnational governance to most futurists or transhumanists, they have a negative reaction because they think, oh, well, can't we get the AI to figure it out? Why do we have to trust these politicians? Look, I understand pessimism about democratic institutions, but we do need to have political solutions to technological risks, and we need regimes of technological regulation. One of the things that really was the dividing line between the left and the right within the transhumanists that led us to decamp rather, was the fight over the Food and Drug Administration. If you don't believe that there should be regulation of emerging technologies like genetic enhancement of babies, then you, are not speaking to the vast majority of the world who either want to ban it or want it very tightly regulated. And we have to work with, in the real world. If you want this stuff, it has to be in the real world. And so we have to figure out how to regulate this stuff. So in that case with genetic engineering, I'm perfectly willing to talk about what genetic engineering technologies should be banned. I think some should. But I'm also willing to entertain at the other end what should be considered mandatory on the same grounds that you might consider vaccination mandatory.
Going back a little bit to your sort of approving a quote from Marx and the sort of Promethean element of this, and the Promethean theme is something that runs through the history of the Enlightenment as well, whether you look at Condorcet, who you mentioned earlier, or you look at Mill, or you look before them, like we said, at Descartes. I mean, this, and certainly if you look at the contemporary representatives like Amédée, you have this kind of goal of exerting agency over more and more things, right?
Yeah. I definitely agree with you that this is, that the Enlightenment vision is about expanding human agency, both individual and collective.
Yeah. So that you eventually control everything from disease to death to the elements, et cetera, et cetera.
Control the freaking sun. Control the galaxy.
Control the galaxy, exactly. So once we're controlling the galaxy, I guess my question is, this is the old critique, but it's not completely irrelevant. This is the Greek critique, namely hubris. Too much responsibility makes you an anxious wreck, because if you can fix it, if it's broken, then it's your fault. A kind of restless anxiety. So I guess one thing that I always think about in the context of, is it good for us to become masters and possessors of nature? And yes, I know I don't want to be dead at 30, and if there's good cancer drugs, I'll take them, et cetera, but are there serious psychological risks in this kind of hyperagency, or even if there are, in your view, they're just minuscule compared to the benefits?
Well, are there risks to hyperagency? Yes, there are risks to hyperagency. Yeah. Is there risk to agency? The whole view is
hyperagency, is what I'm saying. Once you quote Marx on, approvingly describing the Promethean impulse, or once you approvingly quote somebody like Mill, who says nobody is worth listening to who doesn't think that we can overcome everything that ails us, and make sure that our objects of affection don't die, and there isn't poverty and illiteracy. That is hyperagency. The project is hyperagentic, is what I'm saying. Your project.
People sometimes say to me, "Look, you're a Buddhist. Aren't you supposed to be
living in a bathtub?
Have equanimity about sickness, aging, and death?" And I say, "Look, my approach to Buddhism is the same as the Serenity Prayer, Niebuhr's Serenity Prayer. Have the serenity to accept the things you can't change, and the courage to change the things that you can, and the wisdom to know the difference." Right. So for the last 35 years, I've been trying to lose weight. Mm-hmm. I've been hoping for an effective fat pill. Mm-hmm. GLP-1s really came on the scene the last couple of years. I get diagnosed with diabetes. I've lost 45 pounds now with these GLP-1s. Okay. I'm very happy with this kind of agency, my control over my body. Now, I was miserable for a long time and about not having that kind of agency over my own body, and as are many people. And certainly as a Buddhist, and just as for my general mental health and for most people's mental health, body positivity and accepting yourself and all of that, and just trying to be healthy. Yes, I tried to do all of that. Am I happier now that I actually can take a shot and accomplish the kind of agency I'd been attempting for 35 years? Yeah. Yes. I do see that people can make themselves miserable wanting forms of agency they don't have. But I don't think, analgesics, does it make us more sensitive to pain that we have access to analgesics? Might we have been more stoic in the past? Absolutely. Does anyone want to give up aspirin and Tylenol and ibuprofen? No. No, we don't want to. No. So I don't think that the problem is agency or hyperagency. I think the problem is having sufficient control over our own minds. I mean, the moral enhancement, part of moral enhancement for me is having control over our mood, having control over the things that you can accept and not accept about life. The fact that people are becoming more anxious as we become a more technological society, I think means that we need more of that kind of psychological control.
Yeah. Having control over our mood is an interesting example because I don't think we're mature enough to have control over our moods. By the way, whether or not we're mature enough to all have access to GLP-1 drugs is a different story. It's one thing for you to be taking them when you have diabetes or people who are overweight in a way that, risks the health of their cardiovascular system. And then you're going to have a bunch of people taking them for all the wrong reasons of wanting to look skinny when they're already skinny.
Why is there any difference between someone saying I would like to dress in black instead of blue, and someone saying I would like 30 less pounds on my body?
You really don't think there's a difference between those two things?
I do not think there's a difference. I don't think there's a moral difference. I think if people are miserable that they don't have any black clothes.
You weren't born with, any color of clothes. You were born with some kind of physical dispositions. Now you can work to maximize them, you can work to control them, but there's a very different level of agency saying, I am going to change the composition of my body and potentially even sort of bring about some DNA changes than change my wardrobe, isn't there?
Here's the way I would frame it. Brazil and South Korea are purportedly the most intensive users of plastic surgery in the world. And in both societies, there are many people who feel that there are oppressive beauty standards, and that those are patriarchal and often inflected, although the Koreans would disagree, but often inflected with white skin privilege and so forth. So are there bad things about beauty standards that people sometimes use technology to adapt to? Yes. Is it immoral for people to say, I'd really rather be happier without these bags under my eyes or with a smaller nose? No, I don't think that's and just as it's not immoral for people to say, I'd rather have breasts than not, or, whatever other body modification choices they make. It's a funny, the body modification issue, just let me say, is kind of funny because I remember the first big conference that we had about transhumanism and art back in Toronto in 2005. And Stellark, the Australian artist who does a lot of body modification, came, and a bunch of people came with like bones in their noses and, big things hanging out of their ears and whatnot. And they looked at all us square, straight, white dudes who didn't have those modifications. They said, you're obviously not really into body modification. It's like, no, we're into enhancement. What we're interested in is giving ourselves 20 extra years of life, not putting a bone through our nose. Mm-hmm. But, okay, there is a connection here. And the connection is the connection to liberalism, to the connection to individual autonomy and agency, that we do think people have a right to take control of their own bodies and their own brains and their own reproduction and have as many freedoms in those domains as they possibly can that don't hurt others, right? And this is the Millian point, is that we think that in the long run, people having that kind of control over their own lives will make people happy.
Yeah. I guess to bring the points you make together, two objections. One is there is no end to, cosmetic enhancements that you were talking about in Brazil and South Korea. So potentially there's, no end to how few wrinkles you want or how puffy you want your lips to look like, and so on and so forth. So there's...
But how is that different from just dieting? How is it different from saying to someone, you're dieting to lose 20 extra pounds, but there's no limit to how much you can diet? That's my wife's approach has always been, I shouldn't diet because I might go too far. Now she's yelling at me about how much weight I've lost. So.
Yeah, well, we should bring your wife on as a guest speaker because she clearly knows what she's talking about.
She would take your side in most of these debates.
She clearly understands what she's talking about, unlike you. And then the same is true about the mood modification. So yes, there's appropriate dieting and inappropriate dieting. There's appropriate plastic surgery and inappropriate plastic surgery, not in your book, by the way. And then with mood modification, just to finish that point, it is wonderful to get out under major depression. And I would be the first to recommend that. But you're going to be, if you have access to the mood modulators, you're going to be depressed about Trump. You're going to be depressed because you had a fight with your wife. You're going to be depressed because your kids were crappy to you. And you will be taking them then too, because why not, right? And the answer is sometimes it's appropriate to be depressed.
Well, one of the challenges of freedom is that people have to learn how to use it correctly. And yes, people sometimes...
That's why they shouldn't have all the freedom that you want them to have, because they'll never learn to use it correctly.
I mean, it's the lesson of Rumspringa, right? That, you go out and you get drunk and you realize that that's not what you want to do with your life. So I think, yes, no one should disagree that people given freedom sometimes do things that make themselves miserable with it. But in general, we don't want to take people's freedoms away because that's also not a solution. We want to educate people on how to use their freedom. Now, let me go with the case of mood for just
to love their wrinkles.
Okay, well, let me go with the case of mood. If you take people's average mood and you do it from like 0 to 10, so 0 is absolutely depressed all the time, and 10 is absolutely delirious all the time. Almost everything is positive until you get up to about 9. So that's up to about the 90th or 95th percentile of people's happiness, of the average person's being happy in their life. They have more friends, they do better at work, they make more money, they live longer. Everything goes better as you're happier, cause and effect. But you get up to 10 and you're too happy because that top 1% of people who are so happy, no matter what they do, they don't get married as often. They don't vote. They don't get volunteer in the community because they're just so happy. They don't feel the need to do any of this stuff.
So absolute happiness and absolute depression both result in kind of apathy.
Yeah, but it's not a bell curve. Right. It's like everything goes positive until 9 and then there's a drop off. So do I want people, I'm sure that there will be people who will not only want to get up to 10 when they have mood, like cocaine. That's what cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, that's what it is. The people are trying to stay at 10 or 11 in mood. And then they discover, hopefully over time, that that's not the best place to be and that that's not where they need to be.
No.
So I think that's true of everything. It's like, body dysmorphia and plastic surgery. Yes, absolutely. There are people who have, and this is what my wife thinks I am currently. I still look at the little remaining fat on my body and it's like, I could get rid of that. And she's like, you are insane. You are body dysmorphic. And it's like, okay, look, I'm not like Michael Jackson. I don't look at myself and think I'm ugly. It's just that I just want a little bit more control, just a little bit more control, Harley. So I don't think I'm that crazy, but yeah, people, it's in the eye of the beholder, I guess.
Well, and let me take you back to Mill because he really, in some ways, is the protagonist or one of the most important protagonists of this view that we're discussing, the techno-progressive view. And you're absolutely right, where he would say, freedom has these sort of tuition costs that you learn in fucking things up, and then you don't fuck them up as much. And overall,
same with democracy, collective self-determination.
Right. And that's a compelling point to me, I have to say. As you know, I love Mill too, although more ambivalently than you do. This point that it is much better to let a kid, or for that matter, a country, make most mistakes and sort of come to the fact that they've made them than to kind of dictate to them how to behave and have them alienated from, their own projects. So that's the basic Millian point. I think that's absolutely right. The part of Mill that I think is more problematic and that you do seem very excited about is this idea that autonomy, self-design, self-rule, are the primary and only sources of meaning. And this is our old argument. I think there's a lot of meaning to be found exactly in the things that you can't control, in the fact that there are aspects about you that you either in property or in genetics have inherited from other people, and that the unchangeable, uncontrolled, given parts of this kind of legacy are also a big part of what makes somebody's life meaningful.
Okay, but is it the things you shouldn't change, or is it the things you can't change? Because I've already said you need the serenity to accept the things you can't change. None of us should be walking around miserable because we can't change.
Yeah, but you are walking around constantly trying to figure out what it is that you can't change. And I'm sorry, what it is that you can change. This is like the big question.
Why shouldn't people try to figure out what they can change?
Because it makes you neurotic. Maybe not you because you're a Buddhist, but most people, it makes them neurotic. It makes you neurotic. It makes you anxious. It makes you focus too much on yourself. That's why. Ask your wife.
Okay. Well, okay. So fertility. Should people accept infertility, or should they try to overcome infertility? Does it make people more miserable to say,
absolutely,
oh, there might be a solution to my infertility?
Oh, don't get me wrong. I'm not promoting a kind of passive stoicism. There's definitely a slew of big things in life that you should do everything you can about. Fertility for people who want to have kids is certainly one of them. Yeah, of course.
Right. Well, so most of us would like to live longer, be healthier, have more abilities, think faster, have better memories, right?
Yeah.
What's wrong with trying to figure out how to do that? You're saying that trying to figure out how to do those things makes us miserable.
The opportunity costs for most of us.
What opportunity costs? What do you see being sacrificed?
The things that you are not doing while you're trying to make sure that you live 15 more years.
So you would say if someone's exercising half an hour a day to try to live longer and be healthier, that the opportunity costs of that half an hour should have been spent someplace else?
No, I exercise half an hour 5 times a week.
So do I. Yeah. So okay. So who are you thinking of?
You know what's
whose opportunity costs are making them miserable?
A bunch of people who then sort of start tracking their exercises obsessively, who say, "Well, I've run a 5K. Let us be progressive." In the sense of running more, becoming better, becoming more efficient. Now 5K isn't enough. I have to figure out how to run a 7K and how to run a 10K. If you could just stay in this sort of, I mean, it's a very Aristotelian picture, but Aristotle and John Stuart Mill are two very different animals. One is about homeostasis, and the other is about this kind of propulsion. And I hear propulsion from you rather than homeostasis.
I don't think that the two are separate. I mean, I think every person, every society has to figure out what kinds of homeostatic mechanisms need to be respected as a part of, a functioning existence. And if they can be tweaked and changed and improved, then all the better. Let me bring it back to what's actually happening out there. A part of the techno-progressive declaration was also about what people in futurism should do vis-a-vis futurism and what people should be doing vis-a-vis social movements. So in terms of futurism, we were very explicit in this declaration and also the work that we've done since to say, look, most of the futurists out there are either apolitical and therefore don't have a handle on how to make things happen, or they're techno-utopians or techno-libertarians or even worse, fascists. And so we need to reject all that and reaffirm political points about democracy and regulation and the need for a democratic state and so forth. And vis-a-vis the social movements, like, for instance, the women's movement, reproductive rights movement, it's like, who in the world is more committed to people for trans rights, for instance? The whole struggle over trans rights is, should people have the right to use technology to change their bodies, to try to conform to their own vision of what their body should be? And of course, we say yes. And does detransitioning, for instance, make an argument against that? No, it doesn't. It's exactly the same argument. It's like, you tried it, you didn't like it, and you get to go back and revert. So for those who say that trans rights are part of people being made miserable about their gender, and we just shouldn't have ever told them that they had that option, I say no. It's better that people had the option, even if 1% decide that they shouldn't have done that, and that they detransitioned. That's fine. That's the kind of freedom that we want. So,
but for me, that's in the same category as your question about fertility. If something is so fundamentally present for you, of course you should have the technological capability of doing that. But there's a big leap from that to the kind of tech solutionism that your worldview usually ends up with, that all of our problems can be technologically addressed.
I keep I keep emphasizing that the whole point of a techno-progressive point of view is not solutionism, right? It is that
that's where it ends up, isn't it? Or you're just washing your hands of that.
I'm trying to explain to you what I have said and written over and over again and articulated in the various analyses we've done, which is that there's better and worse outcomes from technologies that are possible, and that we could imagine. So, for instance, with artificial intelligence, we can imagine more perfected forms of totalitarian rule, right? Of oligarchic rule. And we have to prevent those. Those are possibilities. We see them in being people attempting to enact them right now. We can also imagine a future with less work, universal basic income, more of a planned economy, more prosperity for all. Those are also possible, right? And to say that those two things are possible, you keep coming back to me and saying that's technodeterminism and techno-utopianism. No. I'm not saying that the technology will bring us the good future.
No, hold on. But even in your Thomas Aquinas Serenity Prayer Buddhist inflected version,
I think it's Niebuhr.
The Serenity Prayer.
Yeah, isn't that Niebuhr?
I thought it was Thomas Aquinas, but what the fuck do I know? You would, because you would say, all right, let's identify, really fundamental kinds of issues like fertility, right? Of course, this is stuff that you would have to address technologically, and forget about the spurious, silly stuff. But I guess what I'm trying to push you on is that seems to me to be a habit of mind, because there's other fundamental, profoundly disturbing conditions like loneliness and anxiety. And our friends in Silicon Valley have said, what, you're lonely? Talk to a fucking chatbot and you won't be lonely. You're anxious, put some magnets on your head and you'll be, while you're talking to your chatbot friend, and you won't be anxious and you won't be lonely. Those do seem to me to be sort of toxic versions of techno-solutionism that would grow from your far more benign one.
We wrote a white paper together on automating therapy.
Right.
A white paper which has just been reflected, not cited, but the logic of has just been reflected in the American Psychological Association's position on the use of AI in psychology, which is that commercial bots should not be used for therapy, which is pretty much what we said. But that they could be very useful for the back office, the management of a clinic, and some of the educative tasks, and working people through various kinds of exercises. For the appropriate kinds of uses, they thought artificial intelligence would be fine, but that you shouldn't just go and get therapy from ChatGPT, which is pretty much what we said, right?
Yeah.
So we were making the distinction: artificial intelligence, neither good nor bad in this situation. Certain uses might be very bad and should be regulated and should be discouraged. Other uses, very good and should be encouraged, right? So that's not tech solutionism. That's saying good, bad, let's go to the good and avoid the bad.
Yeah. So you're saying I'm setting you up as a straw man for tech solutionism, where you're much more moderate. I guess part of what I am committed to is the notion that once you introduce certain technologies, their telos leads in a certain kind of way, right? You're going to come up with a chatbot that's capable of at least sounding like it's doing therapy, and then you're going to say you stay in the back room. The pressures on that, both from the demand and the supply side, are going to be such that it's not going to stay in the back room.
Well, do I think that artificial intelligence will eventually be able to do most human labor, including all of the complicated things we think therapists do? Yes, I also said that, I think, in my contributions to that project.
Yeah, and you're not. So you're not there is troubled by that.
Am I troubled that
by that future being a genuine possibility, that artificial intelligence?
I am troubled. I think we need to figure out how human beings are going to make meaning in that future. I think we need to figure out how they're going to get fed in that future. I'm very troubled by many aspects of that future. I think we need more privacy. I think we need to take all the wealth away from the tech oligarchs who are getting rich off of this transition, and the dictatorial states that are using these tools. So yeah, I'm troubled by many aspects of the transition. And I think that that's what a techno-progressive should be doing, is trying to figure out what is the best possible artificial intelligence future that we can get to.
Yeah. I am thinking more about your Serenity Prayer thing. I like it very much. I'm surprised that you sort of came up with that as a guiding principle, because these are usually the kind of guiding principles that you don't like. Because as like trying to be J. Hughes for a minute, if I was like gaming this out like the chess master that I am, and I would bring up the Serenity Prayer, what I would hear you saying back to me, based on the history of our conversations, would be there is no objective distinction between the things we can control and the things we can't control. To some extent, that's a question of ambition and social construction. We used to think that we can't control a bunch of things that we do now pretty readily control, and so on and so forth. So that is a more conservative distinction in a way than I would have expected from you.
You're probably reading it more conservatively than I intended.
Shocking.
I mean, yes. The idea that we need to be wise enough to understand what can and can't be changed. It's like the nature-nurture debate. Do I think that there is both nature and nurture in the determination of human behavior? Yes. And up until this point, the nature part has not been changeable. Now it is, right? And so now we may be able to not only take drugs that change aspects of human nature, but take genes and put machines in our bodies or whatever that change human nature. I'm just thinking in terms of the moral enhancement point. I think there are some that, the Aristotelian point is that any virtue in excess becomes a vice. I agree. So if you start cranking up your ADD stimulant medication in order to have more focus, you get to a certain point where you don't have more focus, you have less focus because you're totally wired and losing your mind. But in terms of life expectancy or healthy life expectancy, is there a bright line someplace? Is it like 80 years or 100 years? That's how much healthy life expectancy you can have. Anything more than that is enhancement? No. I think 200 years is better than 100 and 2,000 is better than 200. So some things have points of diminishing return or middle ways or golden means, but many things don't. Some things are just more is better.
Yeah. Let me take you back to the beginning for a moment and posit vis-a-vis Condorcet, who you sort of held up as an early proponent of tech progressivism, somebody like Rousseau, who's a much more ambivalent character about all of this. And part of what Rousseau, if he was joining us here, through the wonders of Notebook LM or whatever, part of what he would say is that there isn't linear technological progress, right? That it's always like, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 2 steps forwards, 2 steps back, or 3 steps back. So he has this kind of, famous image, which I've always liked in a book that some years ago we taught together, Discourse on the Origins of Inequality. And the image is, all right, we become technologically adept. We come up with huts. We come up with fire. We come up with heating. We're not afraid of the wolves anymore. We're not going to freeze to death anymore. Technology allows us some leisure. The leisure lets us stand around the fire. Jay is singing. Nir is singing. Jay is dancing. Nir is dancing. And then Nir looks at Jay and says, "Fuck. Jay is a better singer than I am. Jay is a better dancer than I am," and comparison sets in, and the road is open to Instagram. And so the argument is that progress usually comes with regress, and you don't have the diagonal graph that techno-progressives like you like to put on their charts. Do you buy any of that?
Not even I don't even understand the question.
The question is that all
you're-
progress is actually regress. Both of us have glasses. That means that our eyes become weaker. Yeah, it's worth having glasses overall. But that, I guess the better kind of argument is antibiotics come along, overuse comes along, antibiotic resistance comes along. Industrialization increases hygiene, your rates of peanut allergy.
Let's stay with
are
antibiotics.
off the roof.
What lessons do you draw from the antibiotics?
I don't draw any lessons. I'm giving an example. To your question, yes, I would still take antibiotics when I had pneumonia.
Right. And it was still good that they were invented.
And it's still great that they're invented.
And it was really good that we figured out antibiotic resistance was occurring.
Right.
Because we had science.
Right.
And we just use artificial intelligence to find 25 new antibiotics that treat the most antibiotic resistant diseases out there. And probably they will eventually evolve.
And most people,
in relation
a ton
to
of
those.
people are going to start talking to ChatGPT instead of their doctors and potentially ask for prescriptions based on those conversations rather than with their doctors.
Okay. And what did we do about antibiotic resistance? We adopted standard practice protocols and laws that said who could get them and for what.
Yeah.
Right?
And
we used science and the democratic state to restrict the risks and mitigate the risks that come with certain kinds of technological advances. They come.
Yeah.
That's a techno-progressive point. The techno-progressives, unlike the techno-utopians, say there are going to be risks, and the democratic state has to intervene in order to control those risks.
Yeah, you're prematurely suspecting me here of making a Luddite point because I'm actually asking.
Okay.
I'm actually asking.
It's the battle of straw men.
Yeah, exactly. I'm actually asking about a descriptive feature of your worldview, namely, do you kind of take on the sort of jagged version, the jagged nature of progress? And it sounds like you, unlike the techno-utopians, do. And by the jagged notion, I mean, yes, we give...
There's bad stuff.
That by our very technological prowess, we create new problems for ourselves that then we try to solve by virtue of our technological prowess and so on.
Yes, and yes, we don't draw the conclusion from that we should just stop.
Yeah,
trying.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Which I guess leaves open the possibility that sometimes the technological prowess isn't worth it.
Sometimes the technological prowess is so not worth it that it should be banned.
Yeah.
Or highly regulated. Right?
Yeah.
I don't want everyone to have nuclear weapons. I don't want everyone to have tanks. I don't want everyone to have automatic weapons. There's all kinds of technologies I don't want people to have, and that I think the democratic state should stop people from having.
Yeah, yeah. Good.
Okay, let me point out one more thing. We'll have show notes to some essays and further descriptions of this point of view, but I'm working with a guy in Washington, D.C., Eli Zupnik, who is a lobbyist. He has been... he's worked on a variety of political campaigns, one of which was to get rid of the filibuster in the Senate, which he may soon have his wishes fulfilled. He was doing it from the Democratic side. But, at any rate, Ellie and I are trying to bring to life the techno-progressive thing as a political project. We want to start a 501c4 in primarily for DC policy wonks. We've been trying to triangulate with Ezra Klein and the abundance people because there's some overlap with the abundance agenda, which is how can the left liberals get the state to actually build things like high-speed rail, nuclear power, whatever it happens to be. But also to get the futurists thinking in a policy direction. For what it's worth, Zoltan Istvan, who ran for president on the Transhumanist Party ticket, he's running for governor of California now as a Democrat and has adopted universal basic income as a policy platform and a robot in every home and things like that. Andrew Yang is an example of someone who reflected techno-progressive themes in contemporary politics. But the reason I bring this up is because I think one of the failures, the Democratic Party is more unpopular now than it's been, since 50 years? It's like at a nadir of popularity because people don't see a vision in the Democratic Party. And I think the left is at least half of the answer. I think economic populism has always been part of the answer for the Democrats. And one of the ways to keep the interests of working class people in, a party that represents all these other things. But one of the other things that it needs is a vision for the future. If there's anything that Trump reflects, it's that there's no vision for the future, right? It's only a backwards-looking vision. And what inspired and built the left in the 20th century, for better or worse, was that it had visions of the future. And so I think that we need to be serious about the fact that Gen Zers are facing an entirely different world than Nancy Pelosi did. And we need entirely different policy visions and entirely different technological future visions of what the future could be like.
Yeah. And we're going to have to be articulating that future as some of the most important capabilities of those same Gen Zers were undermined by a far more right-leaning capitalist understanding of technology than the one that you articulated for us today.
Well, that's right. I mean, the Gen Zers are facing the brunt now in the labor market of artificial intelligence and other things. I mean, it's not just artificial intelligence that's depressing them, but
having had their attention spans destroyed by a 15-year experiment with social media that we played on them.
Well, this emphasis, I mean, we can go round and round about how much of contemporary social ills should be pinned on social media. I'll give you social media. The social media is not important from a techno-progressive or transhumanist point of view.
We should just edit this after.
You can have social media.
Just edit this after he said, "I'll give you social media."
I'll give you social media. I get healthy longevity and the end of work, and you can have social media. How's that?
All right. Do you wanna talk for a few minutes about contemporary crises and our news roundup? All right, so I wanted to ask you about this MIT report that I've been puzzled about and that people have been fighting about, saying that AI is a bubble. Did you have a chance to take a look at that? Do you buy it?
Well, I think, yes, it certainly made waves, and it came at a time when there were a bunch of different things that were blowing against the AI phenomenon. It has also gotten its pushback that it cherry-picked its data. It's too soon to be able to make these kinds of determinations. I mean, there's a very large literature about technology diffusion in organizations, and we've only had this kind of AI
3 years,
and it's constantly for a couple of years, right? So
almost 3.
The trying to find the organizations that have applied it in ways that really saved them their bottom line. Yeah, it may be a little hard to find right now because people are still trying to figure out how to use this stuff.
And I think you told me this, but I don't remember your answer. How long did it take until the internet started showing productivity gains?
Well, so we got the internet, 1991? Got my first email address like 1990, something like that.
I think it became
HTML.
Yeah, I mean, I think the browser is around 94, 95.
Right. But it's not even so much the internet. It's like automation or the use of computers and personal computers and mainframe computers, I guess starts in the 70s and 80s. And people kept looking for productivity gains. But they seem to have mostly picked up after about 2000. And one of the theories is that the concerns about Y2K, people actually had to go in and deal with this, broken mess of, this flooded basement of legacy software code and tear all that out and replace it with new stuff.
All the Luddites were hiding in their safe rooms for 2 years.
Right, exactly. That's right. With their staplers in the basement.
Exactly.
But that's when you begin to see some productivity gains. But the productivity gains have still been very slow over the last 20 years. And one of my theories about this is like when I think about my own time when I think about my kids, let's talk about my kids instead. When my kids would come home from school and start doing homework at 4:00 in the afternoon, and they'd still be doing homework at midnight. And then you'd look at their computer and they would have Netflix in one corner and YouTube in another and social media in another. Right. So it's like, yeah, probably they were doing some homework for all that time, but they were also doing a lot of other stuff. So the fact that we haven't seen productivity gains There's a lot of things going on there, but I do think that it takes time.
Yeah.
And that's what the engineers who think, oh, well, once it can pass a gold standard test on how to be a mathlete, then it's going to completely change the world. It's like, no, people actually have to use it for that purpose and figure out how to use it.
Yeah. And also, and it's a point that actually our friend Dario Amado makes, I think, intelligently. Not all productivity failures in companies are because of lack of intelligence. It's not clear that intelligence is actually as important as we think it is in the success of any enterprise. There's so many factors that are not sort of subject to technological tweaking, organizational culture and so on and so forth. But back to that report, as I understand it, one of the other problems was that they kind of asked the wrong people. They asked the C-suite people about impact, and those are the people who in some ways know the least about how it's actually used in the trenches.
Well, some of this research on the micro hasn't been that much more encouraging. You ask the actual engineers who use it, do you think it saved you time? And they say yes. And then you examine how they're spending their time, and they've actually spent more time trying to use it than they were before. But that's presumably transient, right? You learn to use a tool, and then things get easier, and you do become more productive.
Yeah.
So, the other story that caught my eye that I thought you might be interested in is there's a growing debate about the use of the term clanker. I don't know if you've seen that.
No.
Okay.
No. So I'm looking lovingly at my car here.
The kids these days have started using the term clanker to refer to automation, robots, LLMs, all of that.
That's funny.
And some of the people in tech are amused, concerned, because it's like, well, we don't want to call them clankers when they actually are self-aware or sentient, right? If we get in the habit of treating them like shit now, what happens when they're not?
We should change the name of the podcast to Clankers. Prosthetic Clankers.
It's like Gunkel's, he thinks we should be more, respect the personhood more, the possibility of personhood more than not call them clankers. I do not think that this is a very serious issue yet, but it is more serious because some of the laws that are being proposed about how to deal with AI psychosis and the misuse of LLMs are that they should be forbidden to ever say that they're persons, right? So that concerns me more, because what if there are inklings of personhood there and we've forbidden them? We've locked it down.
Too bad for the fucking clankers, is what I say.
Yeah, there you go. I thought that was going to be your response.
Yeah. All right. Well, you improved my mood very much.
I gave you a slur that you're not going to get in any political trouble for.
Exactly. Clankers, clankers, clankers. Yeah, there you go. All right, sir.
Okay.